I hope that answers your question.
Dr. Goldstein, what's your comment on this distillation process and of knowledge and wisdom?
Well, one thing, to refer back a little bit to the question about people keeping their education out of the hands of others, it had to do with Dr. Lloyd's observation before that so many entities operate out of the paradigm that knowledge is power, as opposed to that knowledge is to be used for wise purposes. I think that each of us, and it's a strange thing, it goes back to the first question that we posed at the very beginning about, is this an art, is it a science? How do you know what really is wise? Is this genetic? Is it circumstantial? And the distillation process, I think, is very different for everybody. We don't all operate on the same plane as we interpret information and our experience of things. And so I think it's a little bit, shall I say, it's very frustrating, because I don't think there's a simple formula. It's like one of these things where we kind of know it when we see it. We feel that it's right, we operate out of it, and then it works for us or it doesn't. But it's an enigma.
Our next question is from La Universidad de Occidente in the city of Los Mochis in the state of Sinaloa in Mexico.
Good morning. Our question is divided in two parts. What factors do you attribute that in modern days cause a lack of wisdom, long-term wisdom? And also, what could we do today to increase the levels of knowledge at our universities and organizations and corporate level? Thank you.
Dr. Lloyd, what is it in the modern world that keeps us from being wise?
One of the things that we are tending to suffer from is data and information overload. There's a sense in which it's simpler to educate people and teach them about information, perhaps even some knowledge, but when it comes to wisdom, it becomes very controversial, partly because of this point that you don't learn wisdom by being told it. And that's one of the things that happens in educational institutions, is that the students there learn a lot, but it isn't necessarily what the teachers think they're learning. And you find that the whole nature of the relationship between the student and the teaching institution is something that the student takes away a lot from that, often much more than they hear in the classroom. So there is a lot that needs to be done to try to see how some of the more profound issues that society is faced with get a much higher priority on the agendas of learning and education.
Dr. Goldstein?
Yeah, there's also something about the whole process, I think, that puts an emphasis on the goal. To truly have a kind of wise course of action, you have to have a wise or worthy goal. And one of the reasons I think we don't see a lot of wisdom in the world is that there is a spirit almost of worldwide short-term gain, call it greed, where people are looking at what is immediately in front of them and want a material return right away. And that has now become a pervasive kind of backdrop to our global communications explosion, thought of in terms of commerce and the dollars, the payoff in what you can come away with, and the examples of multi-billion-dollar worldwide corporations that seem to be operating only for their immediate gratification.
Our next question is from Colombia. It is from the Federación Nacional de Comerciantes, FENALCO, in the city of Medellín in Colombia.
Sí. Good morning. Our question is the following. A company is characterized by being, quote-unquote, very pragmatic in its approach. And rentability or profitability is the beginning and the end of the company, and we forget about other principles such as spirituality. Then how can we allow for an organizational development process that would allow aspects such as spirituality and wisdom? Thank you.
Dr. Goldstein, why don't you follow with
Dr.
that?
Goldstein.
Yeah, well, the fact of the matter is that the dichotomy that you have just observed is that a corporation somehow exists in a context outside of human beings. And legally, a corporation becomes established, and then people talk about IBM or Microsoft or the corporate entity as though it really can function beyond individuals. As you will see and hear when I talk about my perspective on this whole matter, I think what we have to reintroduce is the notion of human scope and human scale. We have lost the humanity of our communications and the way we do business. And we forget that. And we have to reestablish that.
Thank you. Our next question is from La Universidad Tecnológica in Tecamachalco, which is in the state of Puebla, in Mexico.
Good morning. Greetings to everybody. This is our question. In our previous session, we talked about the fact that the 20th century was a century where economy reigned. What do you think about our next century? Should we and do we have to be more wise? Thank you.
Dr. Lloyd?
I certainly would very strongly argue that it's extremely valuable for organizations. And following on from the point that was just made by Dr. Goldstein, the research that is being undertaken now is showing that those organizations that are driven by a strong sense of values are those organizations that are the most successful over the long term. So there is, in all sorts of organizational contexts, an increasing concern with what are the values of the organization, because those are what determine whether or not it will survive for hundreds of years, not just focusing on the next quarter's profit figures.
Thank you. Our last question for this session is from Ecuador. It is from La Universidad Espíritu Santo in the city of Guayaquil in Ecuador.
Good morning. In our country, we place more importance to the knowledge that comes from experience, more than the knowledge that you get in the classroom or universities. And if to that we add the values that we learn through our environment, institutions, government, family, how can a citizen in a country such as ours reach wisdom? Thank you.
Dr. Lloyd?
Well, the key to that is to reflect on your experience and to learn from that experience and to try to share that reflection with other people. That's really what the classroom ought to be about, and that's where it can be helpful, but unfortunately in many cases it isn't.
Thank you very much for the excellent questions and answers. During our next module, Dr. Goldstein will identify a number of principles that are as urgent for today's organizations and businesses as they were for organizations and businesses a century ago. In today's environment, change occurs at a faster rate than ever before. How can you be sure that your organization is on the right track? Well, let's take a look at some principles that you may find helpful.
A critic who read my recent book You Can't Go Wrong by Doing It Right, 50 Principles for Running a Successful Business, talked with me on the telephone as part of gathering information for her review. And she started out a little aggressively. I think that she was trying to be kind of a hard-nosed reporter, catching me off guard, when she said, right at the beginning of our conversation, "You know, I didn't find anything all that earth-shattering in your book." Well, little did she realize that she was playing right into my hands. Instead of taking offense, I replied enthusiastically, "Great, then you got the point of my book. You see," I continued, "I set out to discover the obvious, tried and true basic principles of good business practice that people tend to overlook or appear to have forgotten. I believe that when you get right down to it, there really isn't anything all that new to be learned about the management of organizations. Except in the fields of the hard sciences, all that we really keep doing is rediscovering the same old things. Of course, we call them by different names. We put the same old things in new and different packages. Fads keep much of the world economy going. We have faddish diets and exercise programs, business models and paradigms that come and go, and faddish ways of dressing. Our world is caught up in the pursuit of the cult, of the new, the different, the supposedly revolutionary, and promises of the truly transformational. Hardly a day goes by without our hearing that some outrageous technology is going to change our lives, the way we do business, the way we relate to each other, play, think, receive medical attention, travel, or otherwise spend our time. Millennial fever has only made things worse. It is the agony and the ecstasy of all of us who have been alive at the end of the 20th and at the dawn of the 21st century that we live in a culture that seems to be swept up in frenzied change and the pursuit of frenzied change. Some people are still waiting for a massive shift in consciousness to occur simply because we crossed into the year 2000. We assume that what will help us be most productive in the future is something strange, as yet unthought of, and even exotic. And we are looking for the special, the novel, the unusual, even waiting for it to emerge and take us by surprise. The American comedian Groucho Marx is supposed to have said, "I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have me for a member." I think you could rewrite that sentence to describe what many people working in businesses and organizations feel about what they have learned and about what they need to know. Rewritten, it would become, "I wouldn't want to know what I know about what I need to know." There has to be something more and better. To return to my book, You Can't Go Wrong by Doing It Right, for a moment. It is the exact opposite of pursuing the cult of the new and different, just for the sake of being new and different. It is based upon a case study of a company that was founded in 1898 in the United States and that is still in business, even though the original owners sold it many years ago. The book is a Back to the Future book about business and organizations, and even about life. But it isn't just a nostalgic trip, a look backwards just for the sake of resurrecting the past. Any of you who have dealt with publishers know that they don't risk their money producing books just because they happen to be pleasant excursions in history. No, the point of my book is that there really are timeless principles of good business and organizational practice. And, as the title says, you can't go wrong by doing it right. Of course, you first have to know what is right so that you can do it and not go wrong. And that is much easier said than done. So that's where the book comes in. It talks about a collective body of knowledge that has emerged out of the practical experience of doing things. At its highest level, that body of knowledge approaches what we might call wisdom. At its basic level, it might simply be called good sense. That same body of knowledge appears to be timeless. We may choose to forget or ignore it from time to time, but eventually we will come back to it. We will see the wisdom in applying it, because when we stray from it, we make mistakes. The underlying observation that led me to write my book is this: as we look forward to the challenges of the 21st century, and as we hear of the supposed dramatic breakthroughs and innovations of the future, we need to understand that, ironically, what will really make us most successful in the future are the tried and true principles, the wisdom of good business that we actually associate with the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Those timeless principles are based upon the most obvious and reasonable standard or benchmark. What is human? Human in scope and human in sensibility. In other words, we have to rediscover the lost art of doing business. Far from hurling us headlong into some altogether unknown future, modern information technology is actually putting us squarely in touch with the eternal principles of the past and our past. To be successful in the 21st century, you will have to move as quickly as you can back to the future. In the early years of the 21st century, precisely because of advances in information technology, we will see the rebirth of humanistic business. Business that re-embraces pre-industrial values for the information age. Businesses that recognize that they must focus on the individual. Organizations that see the importance of developing one-on-one strategies between themselves and each person with whom they have dealings. In the future, technology will put us more in touch with ourselves and with others. Modern information technology is empowering individuals to become more and more themselves. And, in the process, individuals are expecting to be treated more and more as individuals. In the future, the goal of the most productive and successful businesses and organizations will have to be to reach people on their own terms. The age of one size fits all is over. We shall see a dramatic change from the mass marketing of the 20th century to micro-marketing, more reminiscent of the 19th century. Even organizational structures will be throwbacks to a former time. The military-industrial model of large, hierarchical bureaucracies will become obsolete and unworkable. Late 19th and early 20th century business was made up of small, boutique stores and companies. As the 20th century progressed, large, national and global corporations began to develop and expand. They modeled themselves after military organizations. Indeed, 2 world wars were catalysts for their growth and development. In the 50 years since the end of the Second World War, corporations have not only increased in size and scope in some cases, they have even become as powerful as governments in establishing public policy. Centralized and highly bureaucratic industrial age businesses and organizations are often at odds with the interests of the people they serve. And they have been able to get away with doing so because they have enjoyed a near monopoly on information. But all of that has changed and will continue to change. The balance is being righted. The shift from industrial model organizations to information model organizations will precipitate a return to pre-industrial humanism. In other words, it will become increasingly clear that there actually is a kind of fundamental natural law in human conduct, and therefore in business. That law is base everything on what is human. If it is consistent with human nature, it is good and doable. If it is within a human scope, it is functional. As simple and obvious as such a perception may be, it is violated most of the time. Take the notion of competition, for example. Competition is good. It keeps people on their toes. It makes businesses seek innovative solutions to problems and find ever better products and services to deliver to people. But cutthroat competition is bad. It is harmful. It strays beyond the human. It is mean-spirited and destructive. It turns the viability of open capitalist markets into an economic jungle. It knows no limits. It violates the concept that we should base everything upon what is human. What nourishes people and enhances their self-expression is good and workable. What inhibits people will not prove workable in the end. Many governments around the world have learned too late the consequences of suppressing people's natural urge to express their thoughts and feelings. Violate the basic principle of humanistic business at your own peril. You may be able to get away with it briefly, but it won't last. What is done on a human scale is wholesome and productive. What is not done on a human scale, even if it briefly appears to be doable, will not survive. Human beings will only allow robots to go so far. The more we progress into the 21st century, and the more our world is shaped by the humanism made possible by information technology, the more the values of the industrial age will appear to have been an aberration from which we are only just now beginning to recover. The most successful businesses, organizations, and people of the 21st century will adopt 8 timeless, pre-industrial core values that validate the human condition as the determining standard against which all activity must be gauged. As strange as it may seem, the more we proceed into the future, the more we shall have to readopt the values of pre-industrial times. The first timeless humanistic value that we need to readopt, and that information technology is helping us readopt, is interacting. This may sound very obvious, but have you noticed that industrial organizations tend to diminish rather than enhance face-to-face communication? Well, typically people hide behind memoranda. They circulate edicts. They think that you can run an organization by broadcasting directives on paper. Well, people need person-to-person involvement. Put a person in solitary confinement for an extended period of time, and you will destroy that person's ability to use his senses. By nature, people are gregarious. To be sure, some people are loners, but the human animal is a pack animal. We naturally move in groups. We seek camaraderie. The first line of a well-known Barbra Streisand song is, "People who need people are the luckiest people in the world." In fact, people who need people are the only people in the world. The most successful businesses and organizations interact with their clients and patrons. They do not pull back from the public. They do not hold their customers at bay. They engage them, for lasting relationships emerge out of their meaningful interchange with people. Far from creating an even greater opportunity for people in organizations to reach vast numbers of people while still being able to hide from their publics, information technology actually is creating a tremendous challenge for establishing meaningful, interactive communication. Most business people welcomed the internet and electronic commerce because they thought that they could advertise and market their products and services to millions of people around the globe. They saw numbers, large numbers of people. They saw email and e-commerce as a way to communicate out, not as opening up a digital two-way street. They never counted on having to answer emails from all those millions of people they reached. In other words, they thought in industrial age mass market terms, but not in pre-industrial humanistic terms.